In the heart of the village, the marketplace thrived with vibrant energy. The air was thick with the scent of fresh vegetables, the sound of haggling voices, and the bustling activity of vendors calling out their wares. Amidst this chaos, Angoi, a heavily pregnant woman, moved with a sense of superiority. Her steps were deliberate, and her swollen belly, round and full, marked her with the undeniable promise of new life. Yet, despite the joy that should have come with such a blessing, a certain coldness emanated from her. Angoi was not known for her kindness or patience. In fact, her reputation was quite the opposite. She was a woman who, when not plotting her own desires, often found pleasure in making others feel small. Today was no different. As she moved through the market, the cacophony of voices and the clinking of metal and wood around her faded into a dull hum. She was too focused on her own sense of self-importance. As she passed a stall where a dwarf was selling hand-carved trinkets, her eyes lingered for a moment. The dwarf, no taller than a child, stood quietly beside his stall, his small frame slightly hunched as he carefully arranged his delicate carvings of wooden animals. Without hesitation, Ngozi's lips curled into a mocking grin. She couldn't resist the urge to belittle him, especially when the market was so crowded and full of onlookers. "Look at you," she exclaimed loudly, her voice cutting through the noise. "So small, what could you even do with such tiny hands?" Her laughter followed her words, harsh and unkind. The villagers around her seemed to shift uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others casting sideways glances at the dwarf. His eyes, however, remained lowered, his face clouded with quiet sadness. He didn't retaliate, not even a single word in response. He simply stood there, as if his presence no longer mattered, his dignity quietly eroded by Ngozi's cruelty. The crowd was uneasy, but Ngozi didn't notice. Her laughter echoed through the air as she continued her stroll, satisfied with her own wit. She had always believed that being cruel made her more powerful, and today, she was content with her victory over the dwarf. Yet, as she moved further into the market, something strange began to happen. The air seemed to shift. The usual warmth of the sun that had bathed the market all morning suddenly felt colder, as if the earth itself was rejecting her presence. The wind, which had been a gentle breeze, now picked up in an unusual, almost unnatural way, ruffling her hair and sending a chill through her skin. Ngozi frowned, the hair on the back of her neck standing up. She glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see the dwarf perhaps following her, angered by her words. But to her surprise, the stall was empty. The dwarf had vanished, as though swallowed by the crowd. A strange unease gripped her chest. The sense of something wrong, something ominous, lingered in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. Yet, she brushed it off as nothing more than a fleeting thought, a momentary unease. The market was crowded, after all, and she was simply feeling a bit overwhelmed by the chaos. But the unease didn't dissipate. Instead, it grew. The laughter of the crowd seemed distant now, muffled, as if she was no longer part of the world around her. The colors of the stalls blurred into a dizzying mix of reds, oranges, and yellows. The chatter of the vendors became a low hum in the background, no longer filling the space as it had before. Suddenly, a loud clap of thunder echoed in the distance, though the sky was still clear. The villagers paused, looking toward the horizon. But Ngozi felt it something in the air had changed. The wind, once again, shifted, this time more violently, as though it were warning her. She stopped in her tracks, feeling the hairs on her arms rise as the chill deepened. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her, something unseen but ever present. She turned, looking for the dwarf once more, but there was no sign of him. Only the quiet, unsettling emptiness where his stall had been. Forget it, she muttered to herself, brushing the thought away. It's just nerves. I've got more important things to worry about. Her footsteps quickened, and she made her way toward a familiar fruit vendor, eager to distract herself from the strange sensations that had gripped her. But as she approached the stall, she couldn't shake the sense of being followed. Turning her head ever so slightly, Ngozi's eyes darted across the market, but all she saw were the usual faces. No one seemed to pay her any particular attention, and yet, the weight of invisible eyes pressing into her back was undeniable. With a huff, she purchased a bundle of oranges and started her walk toward home. Her pace hurried now, eager to leave the market behind. But as she passed the last row of stalls, something caught her eye, a flash of movement, too quick to identify. Her heart skipped a beat. She spun around, her eyes searching the market. The crowd had parted momentarily, and for a fleeting instant, she saw a figure in the distance, small and hunched over. A flash of recognition hit her like a jolt of electricity, but before she could react, the figure disappeared once again, swallowed by the sea of people. Her pulse quickened and a sense of panic crept into her chest. It was him, the dwarf. But how? Shaking her head, she tried to dismiss the thoughts, her breath shallow. It's just the stress of the pregnancy, she convinced herself. That's all it is. Still, the unease continued to follow her as she walked, the market slowly fading from view as she neared the outskirts of the village. She paused for a moment, breathing in the fresh air that surrounded her home. The trees swayed gently in the breeze, the peacefulness of the rural landscape a stark contrast to the tension she felt in the marketplace. But as she looked back once more, just before stepping into the comfort of her house, her eyes caught something strange, something she hadn't noticed before. At the edge of the village, near the dense thicket of trees, a figure stood. The wind blew fiercely now, and the figure's shape seemed distorted, as though shrouded in an unsettling mist. It was too far away for her to make out clearly, but the feeling that it was watching her, a presence lingering in the shadows, made her stomach twist with unease. She squinted, but the figure remained still, unmoving, as though waiting for something. With a shiver, Ngozi quickly entered her home, slamming the door behind her. She leaned against it for a moment, her chest heaving with breath. The unease hadn't gone away, but she shook her head again, trying to clear her thoughts. I'm just imagining things. It's nothing. The market just got to me today. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling. And deep down, she knew that her actions, her cruel mockery of the dwarf, might not go unpunished. Something was coming for her, and it wouldn't be long before she would have to face the consequences of her arrogance. The sun had barely risen when the first pangs of labor gripped Ngozi's body. The usual bustle of the village had yet to fully awaken, but within her, there was a storm brewing, a new life that could no longer be contained. It was as if the earth itself was signaling the arrival of this long-awaited child. She had spent the past few months preparing herself, anticipating the moment when the child would finally arrive. But as the contractions came more rapidly, a quiet sense of dread crept in, unwelcome but undeniable. Ngozi had tried to dismiss the strange feeling that had lingered since the market incident. At first, it was just an eerie sense that something wasn't right. But as the days wore on, the unease transformed into something more palpable, more suffocating. It was as though she could feel eyes upon her at all times, invisible eyes that pierced through her arrogance and pride. But today, she had no choice but to focus on the task at hand. She was in labor and the child was coming. The midwives arrived swiftly, their faces warm but filled with an unmistakable sense of professionalism. Ngozi's breathing became heavy as the pain intensified, her hands gripping the bedpost tightly. She had prepared herself for this moment, But nothing could have prepared her for the emotions that swirled within her now. The child was finally coming, but what would it be? A boy or a girl? Would it resemble her in her fullness, or would it be an unexpected surprise? The women busied themselves around her, assisting with care and guidance as the hours wore on. Ngozi, ever the proud woman, kept her eyes shut tight, refusing to allow any weakness to show. She had always prided herself on her strength, but now, in this moment, she could not escape the vulnerability that pregnancy had brought with it. With each push, the pain grew. The room was thick with the sounds of her labor, but amidst the chaos, there was a deep, silent anticipation in the air. It was as if the entire village was holding its breath, waiting to see what the future would hold for the child who was about to be born. Then, the cry echoed through the room. The midwife, her hands covered in the blood of birth, held the child up. Ngozi's breath caught in her throat as her eyes locked on the small figure. So fragile, so tiny. The midwife's face, which had been calm throughout the process, now contorted with a look of quiet shock. "What?" Ngozi whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. The midwife did not answer immediately. She simply held the child, her eyes wide with uncertainty. A quiet murmur spread through the room. A chorus of whispers from the women gathered around. Some gasped, others held their breath, but all eyes were on the child. It was impossible not to see the striking resemblance between this baby and the dwarf she had mocked in the market. The room grew silent. Ngozi's mind raced and her chest tightened. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears as she stared at the tiny body in the midwife's arms. The baby was no bigger than the dwarf she had so callously laughed at days earlier. Its small form, its diminutive size, was undeniable. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling as she reached for the child. "No," she whispered, a chill creeping down her spine. It can't be, but it was. There, in the midwife's arms, was her child, small, no bigger than the man she had mocked. As she reached for the child, her fingers brushed against the baby's skin, so soft and delicate, and she felt an overwhelming sense of shame. The midwife placed the child into her arms, but Ngozi barely registered the weight of the infant. All she could feel was the weight of her actions, the harsh words she had spoken, the cruel laughter that still rang in her ears. The women in the room exchanged uneasy glances. The whispers grew louder, voices filled with disbelief and caution. "It's the same," one woman whispered, "just like the one she mocked." "The universe has a way of balancing things," another murmured. Ngozi's vision blurred as she looked down at the tiny form in her arms. The baby's face was peaceful, innocent, but it didn't change the crushing reality of what had just happened. She had mocked the dwarf for his size, for his appearance, for the very thing that now lay in her arms. Was this a curse? Was this the price she had to pay for her cruelty? She had laughed at him, believing that her words had no consequence, that they would simply disappear into the air, forgotten by all but the ones she had targeted. But she had been wrong. She looked around the room at the women, their eyes wide with shock, but also with something else, something that hinted at pity. Their pity for her. She could feel it in their gaze, in the way they watched her, the way they avoided looking directly at her. Her heart sank as the truth sank in. She had believed herself untouchable, that her words were harmless, that she could mock and belittle without consequence. But here, in her arms, was the tangible proof of her mistake. The universe had a way of correcting imbalances, of showing you the consequences of your actions in ways you least expect. What you mock in others may one day be your own reflection. The words seemed to echo in her mind, a haunting reminder of what she had done. The baby, still in her arms, stirred slightly. Its tiny hands moved, its little fingers curling around her own. She felt an overwhelming urge to pull it close, to protect it. But at the same time, a deep sense of shame rooted her to the spot. How could she care for this child? How could she love the very thing that had become her punishment? The midwife, sensing her turmoil, spoke softly. "Ngozi, the child is innocent. It is not its fault what has happened." But Ngozi did not respond. She could not. Words failed her as the weight of her actions hung over her like a thick cloud. She had hurt the dwarf in the market, humiliated him for his size, mocked him for something he had no control over. And now, that very same thing had been reflected back at her, in the form of her own child. The room grew quiet, the murmurs of the villagers drifting into the distance as the midwives continued their work, preparing the baby for its first moments of life. But Ngozi was lost in her thoughts, trapped in the swirling storm of emotions that gripped her heart. "How could I have been so cruel?" she thought. "How could I have believed that my words had no power?" She looked down at the child once more, its tiny face calm and peaceful, as though oblivious to the turmoil it had brought into her life. For the first time in her life, Ngozi felt truly small. The midwife handed her a cloth, gently swaddling the baby in it. As she held her child close, she realized something she had never understood before. There was a connection between all things. Every action, every word, every choice, it all had consequences. The pain she had inflicted on the dwarf had not disappeared. It had simply returned to her, transformed into a lesson she could never escape. The whispers continued in the background, but Ngozi barely heard them now. She was lost in her own thoughts, consumed by the overwhelming reality of her situation. Her mind was no longer on her child's future, but on her own. She had to face the truth of her actions, had to live with the consequences of the cruelty she had shown. There was no hiding from it now. The universe had balanced the scales, and she was left to bear the weight of her own hubris. As the hours passed, the weight of the lesson began to settle within her. She could no longer deny it. The child in her arms, so small, so fragile, was a reflection of the very thing she had mocked. And in this moment, Ngozi understood what the villagers had been whispering about. Her arrogance had brought her to this point. The child, a tiny reflection of the dwarf she had ridiculed, was her reminder, her punishment, her lesson. The room was quiet now, save for the soft sounds of the baby's breathing, and Ngozi sat there, a mother in a strange new world. The villagers who had once watched her with admiration now looked upon her with sympathy. But she no longer cared about their pity. She cared only about the lesson she had learned, a lesson that would follow her for the rest of her days. What you mock in others may one day be your own reflection.